Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Renuka Nadkarni, Chief Product Officer at Aryaka. Aryaka has long been an interesting service provider to me, as they don't neatly fit into categories like facilities-based carrier or a managed service provider, having always taken a slightly different approach to how they offer enterprise networks. So we start out in the interview getting just a clearer picture of how Aryaka approaches the WAN across different services like network, WAN optimization, SD-WAN, and security. But Renuka's particular background and role, as you will hear, is in the security piece, which is where we spend much of our time in the conversation. We talk about the state of the modern WAN and the forces that have changed it, and delved into how those changes impact how one needs to think about security in the WAN now. She has, I think, a particularly clear and interesting take on what it means to have a secure WAN with all of these different forces moving the threat landscape around, and what it means to have adopted SASE for your WAN, since that is the way that everyone is talking about it in the market these days. We close out on a topic that I'm particularly interested in, so if you listen to this show, you've probably heard me bring it up before, which is the future of the WAN in an internet-focused world. And I really enjoyed her take on all of these topics, and I think you will too. Okay, welcome to the show, Renuka.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be here. Very happy to be here.
Excellent. All right. So I thought it would be useful if maybe you gave us a brief background on yourself. You've been at a few different places before you came to Aryaka, and then how you came to Aryaka and what you do there.
Sure. So I've been a follower of security technology and evolution. That's how I like to think about it. I have pretty much built every kind of security technology that's out there and
Excellent.
follow the evolution of the threat spectrum. So back in the day, I started on the VPN encryption side of things, and I did intrusion prevention, firewall, network access control, web security, and so on. And what I think is it's a very security is always evolving. There is always new. There is always new kinds of attacks. There's always new the new transformations that customers are going through. So that's been my background. And prior to Aryaka, I was CTO at F5. That was in the application delivery, making sure that as customers are adopting the cloud model, helping them with the networking security, so on and so forth. And Aryaka was founded with this vision of securely moving the user or taking the user to the applications wherever they are. So users can be anywhere, applications can be anywhere. And Aryaka's vision was really to provide that network connectivity at extremely high performance, guaranteed bandwidth, guaranteed performance, low latency. And as our customers were getting more security aware with the evolution on the threat side of things, we added security elements to it. So the way we think about Aryaka is our goal is to meet the customers where they are and help them with this global connectivity using our private backbone from point A to point B, which is not only high performance, but is also secure, and give them visibility into what's going on with their network.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great review, and it kind of brings me to where I sort of wanted to start here, which is that so we at Telegeography used to run a conference series called the WAN Summit, which is still going, but we've sold the brand. And Aryaka was actually one of the very first sponsors. It's going back almost 10 years, I think. And ever since that time, I've always had to sort of help people field questions on, is Aryaka a carrier? Or, back then it was, more the nascent sort of WAN optimization and very nascent SD-WAN and things like that. Are they an SD-WAN provider? So how would you sort of place them on being similar to carriers, but having a sort of different philosophy perhaps? And especially in terms of bringing together maybe the separate elements of connectivity, SASE, security, and SD-WAN.
That's a great question. So one way to think about it is the way the compute industry has evolved, right? So we think of ourselves as what Amazon did to the compute industry, how the way people
Mm-hmm.
consume compute changed completely with the cloud compute that happened. Aryaka believes that we are an equivalent of it from a network security side of things. What I mean by that is uh, the most important thing for customers is business agility, to be able to provision network where needed for their applications to be made available to their customers, to their users. And how can you do that in a cloud kind of a fashion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Aryaka is cloud first WAN transformation. That's how we started our company. And unlike most carriers, the focus is really on it's a very piecemeal kind of an approach. It's like you solve one problem, but then you still have like more things to do, and everything is done in a very just like you would install an appliance, or just like you would buy
Mm-hmm.
servers on a compute side of things. So that entire model, the entire operating model actually changed because people stopped buying servers, and they went to Amazon for cloud. So think of it that way, where Aryaka makes sure that you don't have to have like a plethora of these appliances on your site, and like you have a networking gear, you're trying to do SD-WAN, you have multiple different kinds of connectivities coming in. Now you layer a firewall on top of it, and you have this entire thing that you need to manage by like hiring maybe like resources and somebody managing it
Mm-hmm.
at all these global locations, which are dispersed and very hard to manage. So Aryaka solves that problem. So we are actually providing network connectivity just like you would get from anywhere else. But the delivery model, the way we approach it, it's a cloud first. It's a zero touch for the customers. It's a matter of they sending an order saying that I want connectivity in Brazil, in Chile, starting this date, and this is how it should be delivered. And that
Mm-hmm.
is the simplicity that Aryaka brings to the table.
It's funny because in preparation for this, I went back and I looked at some of my very earliest email exchanges with Aryaka, which were like 2014, I think. And I had said to one of my colleagues, "So I'd really like to hear more about this as a service model I've heard about." I don't even think people were saying network as a service back then, but would you say that this is a network as a service kind of model now?
Yes, it's network as a service, but it's actually more,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's not just network. Like the minute you think of network, you also need to think about security, identity.
Right.
Who is coming onto the network. I mean, having a network is one thing, but making sure that that network is not abused, or it's not DDoSed, or it's
Right.
available, is actually the entire like different ball game.
The purpose of a network, right? If it can't be networking, then it is not serving its purpose, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. So I feel like network as a service is a limiting term
Mm-hmm.
from that perspective. I
Mm-hmm.
feel it's the connectivity. So we call it secure connectivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can connect users from anywhere. You are coming from home, or branch offices, or wherever they might be coming from, to the applications which are anywhere. And I think this is a very massive shift that we are going through. And of course, COVID accelerated this whole notion, which is originally the way people did business. Their operating models were like brick and mortar. They suddenly wanted to do digital transformation because they needed online presence, thanks to
Mm-hmm.
all the things, and with the way world changed because of COVID. Similarly, users were like sitting in the office. You had like nicely connected bandwidth. Now users are like they are at a ski slope, and
Mm-hmm.
they are working from wherever, not just home.
Right.
So there's a massive shift in terms of how the connectivity needs to be provided. And
Right.
actually, that's another very big drawback, which is networking world, generally speaking, has been very in a very static space. The networks are already always very static, and it's like I get a link from point A to point B, and then you expect it to be there, right?
Right.
With Aryaka's model, like I said, it's a click of a button, and we aspire to provide that connectivity between users anywhere to applications anywhere.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And certainly we're going to talk about the WAN market and how different it is now than it was, say, 5 or especially 10 years ago, and how that plays into it. But before we move there, I just have one more question, which is that someone looking at your services, are these all sort of proprietary Aryaka services, or are you working with channel partners for maybe something like SD-WAN or SWIG or something like that? Do you have channel partners that you work through to bring that together for the customer, or is it all done sort of in-house?
So great question. So we are a channel first company.
Mm-hmm.
All our sales go through the channel. And when we do the delivery of it, the services portion of it is delivered by Aryaka team.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? But we
Yeah.
are a first company, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk a bit about the state of the modern WAN. So this podcast is now Telegeography Explains the Internet. It used to be the WAN Manager podcast. So we've talked about this a lot on the show and just the forces that have changed it. But I would love to hear your perspective on it. And I think we'll start with some kind of SD-WAN service that for a long time has meant many different things, right? But once enterprises started adopting SD-WAN and started especially maybe minimizing their use of MPLS, um, uh, is that sort of enough if you sort of adopt SD-WAN, moving away from MPLS and towards internet? Is that enough to meet the modern demands of the network, in your opinion?
I think that's just a starting point. And what we have experienced is there is a tremendous shift in the way of thinking, the way customers' operating models are changing. Again, I want to use the word operating model because earlier it was like brick and mortar, and I knew where I was going to be. I knew what kind of connectivity I was going to get, and I would put a SD-WAN appliance, and everything is happy. Like
and the network was a thing that sort of as itself you bought, right? Rather than an evolving kind of monster, right? Yeah.
Exactly, right. And there was a lot of determinism in terms of where I'm going to be and like where my users are going to be. And all of that is now shifting dramatically. One of the biggest thing that we see in our customer base is our customer base CIOs who are not just looking at solving like I'm going to bring these 5 sites online, but just they are actually looking at the entire business model. What makes sense for us? How do we make sure that we have flexibility? So some of the unique things that Aryaka does is you can buy bandwidth from us and you can use it in different places, like super unique. Like, you can buy something from bulk, but you don't need to be like, dedicating a certain percentage. So even the network planning, the capacity planning aspect of it really needs to be managed. So doing SD-WAN and thinking about, okay, if this is something you want to do is actually just the starting point. If you really want to do WAN modernization, you really need to think about, okay, how do I have global presence? That's the other thing that we are seeing. In fact, one of the things I liked in your report as what's happening in 2023, some of the conversations are around like the international bandwidth is doubling every 2 years. Who knew, right? We had a very concentrated business models in the past, and now that is actually changing. International bandwidth is becoming, more available. People are becoming global entities. They are doing business. Your markets are now very globally diverse.
Right.
Because the things are so accessible, information is accessible, the things that are so easily available from different countries now, it's actually changed dramatically. Again, thanks to the whole digital transformation and thanks to people also getting access to these even the information with the social and so on and so forth. So clearly that's a starting point. We are also seeing some of the customers asking us for 100 gig connectivity, right?
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, really big pipes, like which is exactly to your point that with everything moving off of corporate premises, moving more local, sort of more close edge, if you will, to where the internal customers of your network might sit, and with people who are going back to the office, what do? They get on Google Meet or something like that, right? So yeah, I think bandwidth demands and workloads have shifted massively. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we see that a lot in our data, which is why it always piques my interest. So.
Right. And you touched upon a very interesting point about workloads. So what happened is with this whole like I described this as infrastructure era where everyone was very network focused and everything was very static, to the application era where now applications are in the cloud and the cloud adoption was a big deal. And we saw a lot of customers like hop onto cloud only to realize that their cost models weren't working. Right.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
now people are like, hey, what am I going to do? And how this is where what I call what's happening is the convergence model, where from the cloud now people are moving to the edge. They are actually doing a hybrid model. Sometimes they have a private data center, then they have a public cloud. Again, because if you want to have truly amazing user experience, if you have workloads in say Amazon West, but your users are coming from Asia and multiple different places, their user experience is not as good.
Yeah.
So the two options you have is take your workload and replicate it in all the zones, which is gonna quadruple your cost
Right.
of compute on Amazon and public cloud, which is already very high.
Mm-hmm.
Or the second option you can have is what Aryaka offers. So what we offer is you come to our private backbone, and it is like an internet highway. Once you get on the backbone, no matter where you are in the world, your experience is exactly like you would have been in the office. So we call it like LAN-like experience over the WAN,
Mm-hmm.
which is you have the same experience that you would have had if you're local in the Amazon West regional,
And
right?
as a practical matter, does that mean that you're taking maybe some of the data and caching it local to those users, or sort of how are you getting over the we're telegeography, right? There is ultimately always a geographic factor, right? If I'm sitting in Sydney and my workload is in one Wilshire, there's going to be some latency, right?
Yeah, I see there are many reasons for the bad user experience, and latency is not actually the primary reason. The primary reason typically is packet loss.
Right.
So,
Right.
so the big distinction really is even if the packet makes it like a few milliseconds late, it's not human perceptible. Humans cannot perceive that information. But when you have packet losses, which is actually super common, the minute you go from like one side of the internet to the globally, when you're transiting multiple different service provider networks, everything is on IPsec VPN tunnel. You're trying to actually this like massive massive overhead because of the encryption and so on. Every packet loss, and if there's a retransmission, it actually completely changes the equation. And we had customers who went home with with COVID. They had their employees go home and work from home, and they actually couldn't conduct business because they would get on a video call, or they would get on whatever applications they were using, like even ASAP for that matter. A lot of customers told us just accessing it over the VPN tunnel was very, very difficult.
Right.
So in Aryaka's world, the way it works is we have full IPsec VPN, but we actually focus on zero packet loss, as you probably know about Aryaka. That's our specialty. We build a pseudo TCP connection between point A and point B, such that we ensure that connectivity, bandwidth, latency, whatever it is available to you throughout the process.
So really, it's more about the network technology, not crowding gateways, all those kinds of things, not having too much space used by all of the different sort of encryption, that rather than the physical distance traveled makes the bigger difference, essentially.
Exactly. And that's where inserting security technologies in the mix, right? So you already have a network latency, network layer 3 hops that you need to transit. You need to do handoffs between the service providers, whatever or the other complexities are. On top of that, add your security conversation. You add yet another hop with your appliance configuration, all of that completely slows it down, which is the problem that Aryaka solves. So we do everything in what we call a single pass architecture. So we do not only networking, all the WAN optimization, compression, all of those technologies, encryption for security. We also do access control with firewall and so on.
Well, yeah. All right. So that's really interesting, which brings me directly sort of to where I wanted to talk next, which is that, of course, all of these changes that you're talking about in the WAN lead to the need for a different security framework, a different security strategy that has been, of course, first zero trust, and then sort of adding zero trust into a larger framework of SASE. For a lot of enterprises, they've seen that approach as kind of like, okay, well, I have my network, now I need to add a SASE framework. How do you see these different kind of strategies all working together? So connectivity, SD-WAN as a part of SASE, but then also SASE as well, sort of bringing together your network and security strategies. And I want to frame it in the sense that it is still the case. Some of the enterprises that I talk to have separate cybersecurity teams with their IT infrastructure teams, and they're getting much better at making sure they're talking to each other. But even from that standpoint of unifying their understanding and their strategy from both of those standpoints, how does Aryaka approach that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You touched upon a few topics, but at a very basic level, as I told you, like I have built all different kinds of security technologies in my past life.
Right.
And the problem that a security vendor has, and I had as I was building the security, different solutions, was there was no place to consistently and ubiquitously install security policies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you can have a set of enforcement points that you have complete control over, and you can do a great job of applying your security policies there ubiquitously, right? Or consistently. But doing it like across all these different variations, users are coming from managed devices, unmanaged devices, they are coming from office, they are coming from Starbucks,
Right.
right? How do you ubiquitously have the same security policies is actually the hardest question that I feel we needed to solve for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can call it zero trust access control. We can call it, SASE. The way I like to do it is I like to like flip the conversation around, which is, hey, customer, what problem are you trying to solve for?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
one of the biggest challenges the industry has is we have come up with so many point solutions to point problems. Just making those solutions work actually introduces a new attack surface.
Mm-hmm.
And 85% of the breaches happen because of misconfiguration. They don't happen because of the technology not doing its job, right?
Right. 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 So
Uh,
and by misconfiguration, you mean you haven't matched exactly the right service to the right sort of need within the enterprise, essentially.
exactly. So, I mean, on an average, an enterprise customer has 65 different security products or vendors.
Yes,
Okay?
indeed. Yeah.
So now you think about somebody making sure that they are all properly configured. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen very strange network environment in my customers with what I call it is bad hygiene. It's like
Mm-hmm.
hygiene issues. And you have a firewall, but it is like allow all. Like you have like hundreds of rules of a firewall, and then you have one rule on the top that says allow all.
Right. Right.
Right. So I'm like, okay, how does this help? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so going back to the question you had, it's all about what problems you want to solve for. And the way Aryaka talks about our security philosophy is depending on where the user is going. So if you are going to the internet, we will give you security needed there, like URL filtering, anti-malware, antivirus.
Right.
If the user is going to a SaaS application like a Salesforce or any of the other ones, we will give what's called as the CASB, which is Cloud Access Security Broker kind of capabilities, which is
Mm-hmm.
depending on the application, you have different kinds of controls and stuff like that. If the user is going to a public cloud, the first question you would like to know is like, do I have any compliance violations? Do I have any private
Right.
data in there? So we can actually tell you that your traffic is going to these assets. So we are also solving the shadow IT problem of
Mm-hmm.
public people not knowing where their assets are.
Right.
And then on top of that, people can do the scanning of those assets, because that's where the traffic is going, and we can figure out if it's compliant or not. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's a traffic between users and the data center or between side to side. One of the very interesting thing we noticed was we can actually identify any kind of anomalous behavior with malware and so on just by looking at the patterns. Like we had like 3 customers in the last 6 months who had a ransomware attack. We found out about it in the news because it was like very sensitive, confidential stuff, and they had to disclose it at one point in time. And we reached out to the customer and said, hey, we heard about this. Anything we can do to help you? And they said, give me all the accesses that happened between in my network during this time period.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, there were lots of abnormal accesses and activities between locations that had never communicated with each other for 5 years.
Right. Right.
But the nature of the communication, it was probably lateral movement of the ransomware, and it was spreading, in a, we could have really like told them like, hey, this is not a normal behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Aryaka's conversation is we connect point A to point B, we give you the best network performance, we give you security. And what we intend to do, and this is something which we are in our roadmap conversation, is to give you observability,
Mm-hmm.
which is we had access to this malicious traffic communication. So we had visibility, but we weren't actually looking at it and saying this is abnormal. So that is the observability part. So today we
Right.
do visibility, but we really want to kind of like tell the customers more about their business and give them what we call as observability features.
And is that something that you're envisioning through like AI ML rather than engineers in a SOC or whatever, sort of flagging things? Like, in other words, exactly the situation you describe, where you say you can have pretty simple rules saying, hey, these two endpoints don't usually communicate, and there's been a lot of traffic. That's something that we could probably do without even humans, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. So I think, yes, a lot of these things are, I think they are better than done by AI ML than humans, but they actually feed into the human operators.
Right.
So we give our customers visibility and observability, and we say, hey, we think that these conversations have happened, and we, by the way, did that. We actually had. Like we had an instance where we were just happened to be looking at it and we said this doesn't make sense, and they found out that somebody had put like some service that they were not supposed to have there, right? So this happens all the time, but a lot of this is of course better handled with definitely unsupervised machine learning.
Right, absolutely. So from you've really touched on a lot of this, but I wonder if you could sort of lay out for us, in a sort of maybe element by element kind of a fashion, how does Aryaka view the SASE framework? So, and the reason I want to ask it that way is that a lot of WAN managers, IT infrastructure folks, they have heard about SASE. Their bosses, especially, might have heard about SASE. And once it gets to the C level, it's like, "Hey, are we doing this?" Like, what would you approach a potential customer saying, like, "This is what you need to be able to say, check that box, like, yes, boss, we have the SASE framework operating."
That's a great question. In fact, this is something we have learned from our customers. Our customers are on a journey, just like we are on a journey, and the whole industry is evolving towards SASE. So what we see our customers do is typically they start with, they have SD-WAN as a base, which allows you to put controls anywhere that you need, which is,
Right.
I think, the number one problem statement, which is how do you enforce the security that you already own, right? So once you have that SD-WAN base and you have remote users coming in from, with the client access, you can do the basic stuff. Is our customers start with firewalls, so they actually integrate or merge their firewall configuration into the network layer. That's the first and the very simple conversation. Now that doesn't mean that you have to replace your existing NGFW vendors or firewall vendors. No, you don't. You can actually have NGFW firewall do like whatever else it's normally doing until you are able to retire it. So a lot of our customers have the firewalls which are in the refresh cycle, so they are up for refresh in like a year or two, right? So you can gradually start saving money, but we don't expect people to do rip and replace is basically the point, right?
Right. So not rip and replace. It's more like add on slowly, see what you can take away once that's up and running, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And it's a very good transition because it gives people time to change the processes. So the other portion is like when you're changing your operating model as a company, you're also changing, the approvals and firewall rules. Like how do you send them? How do you configure them? All of those pieces, right? So it gives people a lot of, it gives them a gradual path to actually migrate the firewall conversation into SD-WAN. Then the next step that we typically see our customers do is basic URL filtering, right? SWG capabilities, basic antivirus, anti-spam, all the SWG capabilities that we know that exist today, right? And these are, in my opinion, very low-hanging fruit. And they are very deterministic security technologies. One of the things I feel with security is there are so many interesting technology solutions out there, but then a lot of them are not as mature or as deterministic, right? So if you look at say, firewalls and SWG, they are very deterministic. They are very mature technologies, something that people can feel very comfortable with migrating. And in my opinion, I feel like if you have these three components together, you have a SASE solution.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's great. I love that sort of like clear path that we can finally say. I mean, it was the same with SD-WAN at first as well. Is this WAN optimization, or is it something entirely new, that kind of thing, where it had to sort of evolve into a place where someone could say, okay, now that's what SD-WAN is, and now I have it. So, and also it's interesting to hear that really the foundation of SASE is SD-WAN, right? So that's like the kind of starting point. Yeah. So you had these experiences at like pure play security providers like F5, for example, and we're working on security at VMware, not a pure play security provider per se, but how does that sort of lead you to think differently maybe about your approach to security at Aryaka, where you're really coming at it from being a network provider as well. Does that change the way that you think about networks, not just security?
Absolutely. So if you look at, like I mentioned, I always follow the evolution of security, and it's very important that you should be able to enforce the security portion in there. So when I was at VMware, we looked at all the ESX controls and how can we intercept the virtual network traffic in the best possible way. I was at Infoblox where we did DNS, and I introduced like the DNS security controls. Like DNS is a very powerful concept. You can have a lot of security technologies based on that. And then at F5, it was application delivery controller, and we had access to the complete packet path, and we could do application security. So we built like, the anti-bot technology. We built some very innovative behavioral-based web application firewall, like learn your applications and look at the behavior and actually identify what's not a right traffic, what is right traffic, so on and so forth. So at Aryaka, we have actually a broader footprint, which I'm super excited about, because we actually have access to the complete network traffic, both on the campus side and the data center side. And when we initially started, we started building the forward proxy technology baked into our SD-WAN stack. And we quickly realized that not only are we able to handle the attack spectrum, which is like on the campus side and predicting the user side of things, we also have the reverse proxy technology. We used to do CDN in the past, and we have reverse proxy technology where you can now address another set of spectrum of attacks, which are the OAP's top 10 attacks, automated attacks, all the application security side of things. So what we ended up doing at Aryaka is we are actually doing the things that the industry took 20 years to do, right? So the industry took, like, we started with stateful inspection, then we did like proxy, then we said forward proxy through the delivered as a cloud. Then we said, hey, we're going to do reverse proxy and DDoS mitigation, WAF attacks, so on and so forth. Aryaka is doing all of these things in a single pass architecture together.
It seems kind of like whack-a-mole, right? It's just there's a new threat landscape and we got to deal with that one, and maybe sometimes with a single vendor rather than sort of taking that holistic picture, right? So.
Yes, and this is what I call a second mover's advantage. Actually, it's kind of interesting because a lot of startups I worked on in 1.0 product technologies, there was such a thing as first movers advantage. And what I realized very quickly is first movers actually identify and uncover the challenges. And in my experience, we had like second mover competitors who actually did better than the first movers, right? So this is another very interesting thing that we feel very strongly about, that Aryaka did security the right way from the get-go. We actually architected this. We didn't go through this evolution of like stateful packet inspection. I'm an GFW, then I have a little bit of an identity crisis. I'm going to become a proxy, then I'm going to do forward proxy. But guess what? My reverse proxy is all open. I have not thought about it yet, right? So we had the luxury of sort of like making sure that we do security the right way. And then the second thing I'm super, super passionate about Aryaka is we can deploy this security. It's the same code that runs in our cloud as well as in our CP appliances. We can deploy it with a click of a button. So the other thing we did really well was we have a distributed data plane to make sure that the security is enforced where needed. You need a firewall at the gate of your branch because you need to protect from the attackers coming in. Not everything can be done in the cloud. It's very naive to think that everything is done only in the cloud. You need to protect yourselves where you are. You need a client on your laptop. You absolutely need cloud-based security. So we have all the enforcement points, and we call that distributed data plane. And all of this is managed with the same code base, with the same policy blobs, which are dropped to all the enforcement points simultaneously. And then we have a management plane, which is also unified to show you exactly what you did. What network configuration did you set up? What QoS did you set up? What optimization did you do? For the same traffic, what firewall rules did you create? For the same traffic, what is your URL filtering? For the same traffic, what are the different policies of security that you have built?
Yes, there's some economies of scale, but working with the WAN where the threat environment can come kind of from any direction, so to speak. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a policy model, which, I mean, if you look at a lot of our, security vendors, top security vendors, you go to their management plane page and they have like, give me firewall rules, give me like SWG rules, give me the rules for this. And then what happens is if you enforce all those rules and you find out like what actually dropped my packet or why my connection was, disconnected, nobody knows the answer.
Hmm.
because then you have like, like this really spaghetti of all these different rules and different technologies, that becomes very difficult to diagnose.
Well, no, not to mention that the expertise on the enterprise side team, they might have trouble finding experts in all of these different security issues, let alone networking issues and all that. And we're upskilling the folks that they do have. So sort of simplifying things to an understandable stack, maybe where you can have policies that operate in different places, I think is exactly what they need, because no one can keep on top of all of this, it seems to me. So.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's something our customers tell us on a daily basis. And they do have really talented teams, but now that they have offices in like global,
Hmm.
remote global places, the team is like, hey, I can manage like my 5 locations in US, but guess what? We are expanding in all these different countries.
Right.
I don't speak the language. We don't have people who can actually manage it. And they're like, hey, Aryaka, can you help us do that? So one of our sort of like the secret for our success is, we just don't throw a very complex technology at our customer. We actually hold their hand all the way through
Hmm.
to install it, to provision it, to manage it for them. So we do what's called as a co-management. So they can manage it, they can manage it with us, but we are always there and we always have our customers back.
Hmm. Hmm. Excellent. So now, Renuka, I want to wrap up by sort of just getting your take on where all of this is going, since you've been, like you said, through all those steps, and I like that second mover advantage. If we go back in history, it was, Facebook was not the first social network by any means, right? It's like, so that idea of taking all of those lessons learned, where does the WAN go from here? There. It seems to some people in the industry, I think, when MPLS is gone and people aren't relying on private lines and whatnot, that maybe the WAN kind of disappears. Do you think there's still a reason, if you're using, mainly cloud services and SaaS and whatnot? Is there a reason to have a private WAN still? And will it be that way for the next, say 5-10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there is a reason. And there's a reason because the way we know the internet today is also evolving. So now
Hmm.
there is a conversation about splinternet. There is this geopolitical conversations. You already know about the China firewall.
Very
There's
much.
there's
Yeah.
no Ukraine Russia conversation that happened. And what's happening right now is internet has become it's available to the good and the bad people.
Hmm.
There are things think about the undersea cable cuts, right?
Right.
Over 150 undersea cable cuts over like just 1 year. And if you're relying on internet, and most of the customers, of course, are, it impacts your business. It directly impacts the bottom line. It directly impacts the revenue, and your business. So while you want to leverage internet, while you want to use internet, the reliance on the internet cannot be to the level that and the exposure that people have cannot be what it is. Like there's a
Hmm.
massive DDoS attack, there's an undersea cable, there's a geopolitical conversation. Guess what happens, right? Your business is now subject to those variabilities.
Right.
So the way I like to think about it is, with Aryaka's private backbone, you are leveraging the ubiquitous internet conversation, but you are actually able to have that deterministic usage.
Hmm.
So when there was an undersea cut, cable cut, most customers experienced some kind of a latency. They had like some kind of a slow user experience, so on and so forth.
Right,
Aryaka
because the backbone has to adjust itself, and your traffic is
has
getting
to,
routed in weird ways, and right. Hmm.
yeah, and then there are like these hundreds of security providers as well as network providers who actually all use the same exact fiber optic
Hmm.
that was cut, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of customers actually experienced like business disruption and latency. In case of Aryaka, that did not happen. And the
Hmm.
reason that did not happen is because when we provide connectivity to somebody with a certain SLAs, we have twice the provisioning of everything, compute of the network, the bandwidth, the undersea cable bandwidth is also identical, and twice the amount. So there is no congestion in our case.
Right.
So
Hmm.
if you're using the same bandwidth on something, when we do the high availability or when you move to the next one, you get the exact same experience. And there is really, our customers didn't even blink. We didn't even know that this happened.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. So the modern WAN, I would think, is it has to be more reliable. We have to think about how WAN can be more reliable. How can I protect myself from this internet variabilities?
Right, right. Yeah, especially when another thing I've talked about a lot on the show is that the network used to be something, a cost that you had that had to be there so that you could do business, but is now more of a driver of different ways of doing business and different ways of thinking about how to connect with your customers and whatnot. So all the more reason why it should be kind of front and center in, even in business plans and that sort of thing, rather than just a reaction of like, hey, we got to spin up network here. It should be the driver, but it is scary to put that driver on the internet, right? So, yeah.
That's exactly right.
Excellent. Well, Renuka, this was really great and interesting. Like I said before, I've known about Aryaka for a long time, but I always learn a little something the more I hear about you guys, because it is a different model. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Greg.
Yeah, and is there a way that listeners can keep up with you or your work? Do you ever get to blog anywhere or anything like that, or just LinkedIn?
So LinkedIn, and I publish my blogs on the LinkedIn. If you go to our website, www.aryaka.com, most of the information will be there.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me. I hope we can connect again in the future.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.